Hi there, I'm John Oates, and I am a musician, a producer, a singer. Well, some people say I'm a singer, and songwriter. Today on the show, we're going to talk about all those things, plus bringing up a child, moving to Colorado, making music with Daryl Hall, cool cars, and a philosophy of life. Maybe a crackpot philosophy of life, but a philosophy of life nonetheless. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, do you need to up-level your leadership? Well, on this episode, we're going to be speaking with a man who was the purveyor of one of the two most famous mustaches of the 1980s, a man who has been in a business partnership for 40 plus years, and you have got to catch this episode. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook group by simply going and searching Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast on Facebook, and you'll find us there. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please go over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. When you do, you can let us know inside that Facebook group, or maybe we'll give you a shout out on live show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Las Vegas to Georgia. We're also on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. If you're a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, you can also listen to us on Google Home and Alexa. Simply say, play Dov Baron Podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down, dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that business as we've known it is in a constant state of disruption, which means we as leaders have to constantly be shifting and changing and innovating. However, many old school leaders want to keep things the way they were, and all too often, that's a recipe for disaster. So how do we get to know, how do we work out what we need to keep hold on to, and what we need to let go of? Well, stay tuned, because our guest today has been involved in one of the most disruptive industries for more than 40 years. That industry is the music business. John Oates is one half of Hall & Oates, probably, if not certainly one of the most famous duos of all time. Hall & Oates was inducted into the Songwriter Hall. John Oates was inducted into the Songwriter Hall of Fame in 2004. And in 2014, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of Hall & Oates. He's the creator and executive producer for the 7908, the Aspen Songwriter Festival. He's also an author whose memoir, Change of Season, was published in 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome to the stage, Mr. John Oates.
Well, Dov, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, mate, it's a pleasure. I'm excited about it. I am, and I got to admit that I have always been a fan. I loved your music when I was a wee lad.
We're still wee lads in our
We're
mind.
still wee lads, yeah. I'm not 6 feet, so that makes me a wee lad, I guess. As I said, you've been in a business that's being constantly disrupted. Talk to us, if you will. Let's just sort of start there about all the disruptions in this very fickle music business, and what was the impact on you and on the duo?
Well, that's a very, very large question
Sure.
because there's so many facets to this.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at it, when I look at it from a technical point of view, I've had a very interesting perspective because I began my recording career at the beginning of the analog, not the beginning of the analog recording era. Of course, that was, many, many years ago. But when we were recording on analog tape and things
Yep.
like it was that era. My first record I ever made in 1967 was on a little, half-inch 2-track tape. So we, Daryl and I together as musical creators have gone through that era, had our foot in that world, watched the digital world be introduced in the mid to late 80s, and saw the transition technically through that.
Yeah.
On up through of course, the virtual world of today with digital distribution and streaming and all that sort of thing. So from a technical point of view, I've had an interesting perspective of seeing that transition. From a business point of view, when it comes to things like record companies and the traditional paradigm of an artist seeks a record contract.
Yeah.
Signed to it, the old idea was to sign to a major label.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the major labels, of course, had a very very solidified system. It was major labels, radio stations, and distributors of physical.
Yep.
So it was pretty much a well-oiled machine from the 1940s all the way through basically into the 90s.
Yeah.
And that began to break down with the advent of the digital distribution and things like that. And a lot of musicians and a lot of business people in the record business had to begin to adapt and figure out what this new world of digital and virtual distribution was going to look like, how they were going to monetize it. And there was a lot of mistakes made along the way on both sides of the fence, on the business side, from the record company's point of view and the publishers, to the artist side, how artists and musicians were going to deal with it. So it's kind of shaking out now in 2000. It's beginning to seek its own level, and people are beginning to understand it and work within the new paradigm. I know that's a lot, but you asked a large question.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, because for me, what it all boils down to, like I said, I'm a fan of the music, but this is still a business. And I think people often forget that. They get caught in the entertainment and forget entertainment is a business. Music is a business. And as I said, it has gone through major changes. SoundCloud is now a way to release yourself into the world as an artist. SoundCloud didn't exist, just a few years ago. So this is really a new place, and it's interesting that I'm seeing. I was reading a thing just the other day on some very famous rappers. One of them, I think, is called Gucci or something, who was released on SoundCloud with a song that is, and now it's really interesting because you remember that. I do too, but when music came out, when there was records, they wouldn't play a song over 3 minutes on the radio. And then eventually you ended up with Bohemian Rhapsody, which is an interesting loop for us that we can pull back into in a bit. But you had Bohemian Rhapsody that broke all the rules around that and made it much longer. People forget Papa Was a Rolling Stone, which was also a lot longer. But the major song that made it was Bohemian Rhapsody. And now with SoundCloud, they're rolling the songs under 3 minutes because of the attention span, and they get paid out on how often things are played. So it's a very interesting thing for me, is that I always see this in business. There's certain things that loop back.
Yes.
Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. You're 100% right. It's, if you look back on, say from the 1960s, in the early 1960s, it was all based on singles on AM radio, what we call pop radio or top 40.
Yeah.
And you were correct. Songs did need to be short because they wanted to cram as many commercials in as they could and play as many tunes as they could. As the late 1960s, we went into late 1960s, early 1970s, you had the advent of FM underground radio, which began to play longer album cuts. They would do. They weren't so tied to this rigid format that normal AM radio was tied to.
FM and pirate radio.
That's right, and they were doing longer tracks. They were featuring entire albums at some point. DJs, felt more, had more creativity, but it was really reflective of the times. It was, of course, it reflected the times. Now, as you said, you have many ways to release music now, and you're not tied to here again. I'm repeating myself, but the old paradigm of trying to sign to a record company.
Right.
You don't really need a record company anymore. New artists today are releasing their records in many formats. They're releasing them on YouTube. They're releasing them on SoundCloud. They're releasing individual tracks on Spotify to be streamed and so forth, Pandora, whatever.
Yeah.
Services. So I recall way back in the mid 1980s when the CD technology was beginning to be developed.
Yeah.
There was the president of CBS Records at the time was a guy named Walter Yetnikoff. And I remember him distinctly saying he was totally against the CD as a audio format because he said it's essentially a master recording. Once we release this to the public, they have no need for us anymore because they own the masters.
Right.
And that was the beginning of the end, really, and also the beginning of the fact that these major labels and the traditional music business didn't understand the concept of the internet and didn't co-opt the internet and create their own digital record stores.
Right.
Before, of course, iTunes took over.
Yeah.
Apple.
Well, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, in business generally, is that. Again, as I was saying at the beginning there, we hold on to the old and we're terrified of the change. But listen, face it, change is coming. You don't have an option. You can fight it all you like. You can be a Luddite to the situation, but the truth of the matter is change is coming. So the best thing to do is to get ahead of it. Now, in the context of that, you also have been in this incredibly long partnership, and partnership can be hard. I mean, there was Lennon and McCartney, and then there was Yoko, right? You and Daryl have been, you've made 21 albums together, I think it is. You've sold over 80 million units. You guys are one of the most successful rock and roll bands ever. You've had 10 top 10s and 20 top 40s, and you've toured the world for decades. How have you done that? Again, there's all this disruption. And it's a fickle business, and people want it, people don't want it. Nobody wants to listen to Daryl Hall and John Oates anymore, except for wedding singers. And now everybody wants Daryl Hall and John Oates again. So there's that fickleness, and there's the partnership. And I've said for years, please understand. I mean, I talk about this a lot in my work with companies. Is if you are in a partnership, it's a marriage. And you may be married to somebody else at home, but at work you're married to this person. And sometimes it's a multiple marriage if you've got a band or you've got 3-4 partners, whatever it is. Talk to us about that part of it, because with all those changes, those are other pulls at this marriage, I'm sure.
It's a very unique relationship. I like, the reason Daryl and I are considered to be the #1 selling duo of all time is I'm in a sense, and I say this a bit tongue in cheek, but, we win by default because no one can stay together as long as we have.
Exactly.
So there's one, I think, but we have a very unique relationship. I think it has, and it's a hard question to talk about because it's very complex, but we met as teenagers. We met right out of high school. Yeah. We both had separate individual bands. My band fell apart, his band fell apart, and we gravitated toward each other. We obviously found something in each other artistically and also in terms of friendship that we kind of grew up together. So once we began our formal partnership in 1970, we struggled to do what I had spoken about earlier, get the record deal, go on tour. Sure. All the things that were the traditional ways of making it in the professional music business at the time. So in the course of these many years that have gone by, we've dealt with the ups and the downs, the business problems, the personal issues. we've dealt with them together. Not, we're not joined at the hip necessarily, but in the early days we were, because it was kind of us against the world. But we began as friends with no real goal other to make music together and see where it took us. I think had we gone on into this partnership with some sort of really saying, well, we're going to be the biggest band in the world, or we're going to make $1 million, or whatever it might be, that our relationship was not predicated on that. And through the years, one of the things I'm most proud of in our working relationship is that the decisions we made, the important decisions we made, were always predicated on what will allow us to continue to make music, not what will allow us to make the most money, what will allow us to be top of the charts. It was always allowing us to make music because we knew instinctively that both he and I are very similar. We were going to be musicians for the rest of our life. So we took a long-term view of this whole thing. And the way I like to say, and I say it all the time, you've heard it a million times, it's success is a byproduct of hard work, professionalism, and talent. That's what we try to promote. That's what we try to tell the world about ourselves. We couldn't pick a single to save our soul. We couldn't pick a #1 record to save our soul. We gave the same amount of attention to every track on every album that we ever made. The record business, the world, radio, there was a consensus somehow or another that this particular song was going to be the one that they wanted to put to basically ride off into the sunset on and put their money, promotional money behind. But Daryl and I never picked singles. We never, even the biggest songs that we had, the Private Eyes and the Man Eaters and the Sarah Smile and She's Gone. Those songs were album tracks that became successful because someone or, the world at large believed in them. So, that's been our philosophy throughout the whole thing. And
so there's something interesting in there, in what you say from a business point of view, from a leadership point of view, in that it's like you guys knew your strengths and you didn't try to control what was not your strength. Is that correct?
We being a duo, we have an interest to hear again, yet another level of that. We have a lot of individual strengths and we have a collective strength.
Right.
And I think we both realized that it was important to maintain our individuality in the context of how we were going to work together. If you look at our albums, and people might think this is a subtle point, but I think it's a very important point. If you look at our albums, every album says Daryl Hall and John Oates. There's not one record that we've ever made in our lives that says Hall and Oates. We don't look at ourselves as a two-headed monster, as this, unseparable, entity. We look at ourselves as two individuals who work together. And that has given us the ability over the year, as the years have gone on, to do individual projects, to be individual producers, make our own solo albums, make our own TV shows, do whatever we want, but yet still come back together to the thing that we did together, the legacy of music that we created together, and celebrate that as well.
It's interesting because you brought up something there that you've touched into it, or was going to come into later, but it's a fit now. And that is, I was actually speaking to another musician I interviewed recently, who is a business person and runs a business, but is in a famous band and is the frontman for that band. And we talked about being the frontman of a band, being the first name, being the person that they most want the autographs from. And he talked about, and we talked about leadership, and he talked about something that I found interesting, which was the leadership versus the theater of leadership. And I thought it was a very interesting point in that, the front man who is often the prettiest man, who is often the most glamorous or whatever it might be, or often is the voice, as in the singer, but not necessarily the writer, is the person at the front. And to the public, it's often lost how collaborative things are. And I think that this is the case in business, in leadership, that often we don't pay attention. What was that like for you? Because Daryl is, he was the tall, blonde, blue-eyed guy, and you were the mustache for a long time, and I'm going to come to that in a minute because I thought it was quite funny stuff, and I'll tell you about it in a minute. But
well, Dove, I have to say that I've been called many things in my life. Calling Daryl the tall, blue-haired, blonde, fair-haired boy, and me the mustache. That's kind of interesting. I like to think I was a little more than the mustache, but
I want you to understand that I do not see it that way, and I never did. And and I said I'll joke about it in a minute, but I think there's just perceptions, Of
course, the perception is obvious. Daryl Hall is an immensely talented person. He's an amazing songwriter, amazing singer, and instrumentalist. He does it all. I do it all too.
Mm-hmm.
As time went on, Daryl's voice became the signature sound of the group.
Right.
Very similar in a way that Mick Jagger is the front man and singular sound of the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
But there's a Keith Richards, and there's other guys in that band doing
absolutely
that are supporting that. That's basically how this works. I think one of the similarities that Daryl and I have is that we grew up listening to the same kind of music, the same type of families in small towns in Pennsylvania. We have a very, very strong bond in our common musical vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
But the other strength, which is hidden and not quite so apparent, is that we are completely different as people.
Right.
Could not be more different. And when I say different as people, not only in our physical appearance, that's just a thing. That just as it happened. But we have different strategies on the way we lead our lives.
Mm-hmm.
We have different approaches to how we envision our personal worlds.
Right.
And those those different approaches and those different strategies do not conflict. They are totally separate, and they coexist, which
parallel worlds.
Very interesting dynamic. It's very hard. I think people are fascinated when they, and how duos work.
Yeah.
I think they're more fascinated about a duo because it's a very focused dynamic between two individuals.
Absolutely.
Rather than an entire band where you have multiple personalities, multiple issues. So that's really how it works. We don't get in each other's way. I think we're smart enough and sensitive enough to understand when either of us needs something or something is particularly important. And I think we've been able to compromise, give way, and at the same time hold our ground when it
mattered most. Yeah.
So I think it's very unique, very unique.
Yeah, like I said, it's interesting, and the reason because now I want to flip it the other way, which is also it's easy to see the front pretty men as the front pretty men, and ignore the talent. You know what I mean? So that's the other side, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. That I think that people don't realize that this is a partnership of strengths. And there are some things that are visually obvious, and there's so much behind that curtain in any partnership, whether it's in business, two business partners, in a marriage, because oftentimes people go, I don't understand why she's with him or he's with her, or he's with him or she's with her. I'm like, you're not in their relationship. How could you possibly get that? And we don't get that. And this is why I wanted to make this point, is how much of what do we make up about a partnership that's actually not true when there's so much going on behind the scenes?
Right. I mean, if I had to, try to simplify it and put it in simple terms, Daryl has a very, he has the capability of having a very broad and large creative big picture look at his music and our music. I am more of a nuts and bolts kind of person. And I, and to put it, if you really want to get into it, to put it into Zen terms, you can't have a beautiful sunset without a horizon.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. Yeah. That makes tons of sense. So now I'm going to come back to the mustache because it has to be done.
Okay.
I know it's gone, right? This is why it's great. So I said you had one of the two most famous mustaches of that period of time. There was Tom Selleck with Magnum PI, and then there was yours. However, only one of you had it. Only one of those two mustaches had its own series, The Adventures of John Oates and Jay Stash.
That was a school.
So I had to go there.
That was a stillborn cartoon that was done by our publishers to try to, I don't know, it was a wacky idea. I thought it was kind of funny.
Absolutely.
But Lewis Black did the voice of the stash, the mustache.
Was that Lewis Black?
And we didn't really do a series. We did a kind of a sizzle reel to see if it would work. And then it never really connected, but it was kind of funny for a while.
Oh yeah, I was like, when I saw that, I was like, this is beautiful. Like, because, I mean, and I think this is one of the things that we do, particularly with people who are in the public eye, is that I talked about this with somebody recently. I said, my sister died, not this Christmas gone, but the one before. And my sister was not quite 50. And yet, and I've not seen a lot of us in the last 40 years that have been gone, but I've seen her. Mm-hmm. But when my sister died, my baby sister died. You know what I mean? There's a frozen in time thing that happens. And I think that also happens with us, with people who are in the public eye. There's a frozen in time. And so I'm sure that people are like, where's the mustache, John?
Well, it's still here. Look closely.
I know, but it's now part of something else.
Well, that's right, because you know what happens as you age. Gravity has a great effect on many things in your body. So the way I like to look at it, it had a great effect on my mustache. It just
grew down. Okay, so in the process of those changes that take place with age, not for you, but for all of us. You have gone on from not just doing your stuff with Daryl, but you went on and did your own albums. I think I read it was 5 albums in the last 10 years or so. And in many ways, you have returned to some of your old roots. I mean, I talked about the Temptations and Papa Was a Rolling Stone. I know you were a big fan of the old R&B, but your sort of roots go even further than that. They're going to bluegrass, right?
They go way back. I like to think, and I like to say, which is really true, that I was born in 1948. My life parallels the birth of rock and roll. When rock and roll hit in the early 50s, I was old enough and having a little bit of musical talent to actually understand that something had changed, that there was a sea change in music and eventually in culture through the music. And I grew up with rock and roll from its inception. I actually remember music before rock and roll, believe it or not. So, I think I have a unique perspective when it comes to that. And the first music I heard was the great early rockers, the Architects, Little Richard, Elvis, Chuck Berry, people like that. And of course, being I played guitar at 6 years old, so of course I played this. I also played country music because it was fairly simple to play, and as a beginner, it was kind of easy to play. So as I grew up, I began to, roots music, the roots of rock and roll have always been a very important part of my life. Mm-hmm. And I have a great, not only affection for it, but a great reverence for it, because I know, where it came from. And having grown up in the Philadelphia area, had a very unique opportunity. I had the Uptown Theater, where the greatest R&B talents of all time in the golden age of R&B in the 60s performed every Saturday night. I got to see them live. I saw Stevie Wonder play Fingertips when he was 12 years old. I saw Otis Redding. I saw James Brown, The Temptations, The Miracles, Sam and Dave. I saw them all. And at the same time in Philadelphia, had an amazing folk tradition. In the early 60s, as the folk revival was taking over college campuses, the Philadelphia Folk Festival began. It's now over 50 years old. I saw them perform all these important roots artists who are being rediscovered. Mississippi John Hurt, Doc Watson, Son House, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, and so on and so forth. Bluegrass, Bill Monroe, all playing at the Philadelphia Folk Festival and in the coffee houses in Philadelphia. So it was an incredible, fertile time and place to be. And I feel like I was at the right place at the right time. So I have all this stuff that I draw from when I make my own music. And moving to Nashville in the last 10 years, I really became part of the kind of growing Americana community, which is really a roots music based style of music, very open ended, very kind of welcoming to a lot of different wide variety of styles. And I began to tap back into the stuff that made me want to be a musician as a kid, and that's the music that I make as an individual outside of what I do with Daryl.
So that's the question I have for you. What keeps you fresh? Because you are going out on this great tour now. You're going to be doing, as we speak, you're setting up, getting ready to go to Vegas. You're going to be in the UK. You're going to be in Europe. You're going to be in South America. I mean, this is a huge tour. And, I was talking about disruption and things you got to let go of and things you got to hold on to. If you and Daryl go and play, you're going to have to do Private Eyes. You're going to have to do Sarah Smile. I mean, you're going to have to do the classics. What keeps that fresh? Because I would imagine, and I'm not saying it's true, I would imagine that it would be easy to go, geez, this again? Is it, or is it not that?
We have learned over the years that I kind of, I kind of make the comparison to playing the Hall & Oates show, doing the Hall & Oates tours, like visiting a great museum. You can't wait to get there. It's wonderful when you're inside because you appreciate what's the history of what you're looking at, or listening, as the case may be. But you can't wait to leave and go home afterwards. So I think what we've done is we've created a really good balance of the amount of time per year that we devote to playing this really what it is. It's a legacy of music that he and I created together. And we're very proud of it. Don't get me wrong. We love those songs. And luckily for us, we've got a lot of them. And
sure,
they never get boring because of the way we approach our live shows. Our live shows, we don't try to recreate our records. We don't try to become a human jukebox. We infuse a live energy and different arrangements to the existing songs, and that's a tightrope that we walk, because there's certain elements to those songs that are very Catholic in a way. Catholic in the broadest sense.
No, I understand.
They must be played with a certain discipline, so that the song has an identity that people relate to. But at the same time, there's other things that we can do that take the song completely out of the record. If you were to compare the record of Sarah Smile, with the version of Sarah Smile that we do today, they're completely different, but it still sounds like Sarah Smile. So that's a skill that I think that we've developed, and it's fun for us. And we have an amazing band who have a lot of input into what we do, and they give the songs a kick in the butt every night. So that's that. And then when the tour is over, we carve out plenty of time for our individual projects. I do my thing. I'm producing people. I'm co-writing with people. I'm starting a new project called The Good Road Experience, where I'm going to combine my love of cars and guitars and music and healthy lifestyle all together, that's a whole nother story. We'll have to talk about that.
Okay.
But so I've got, so we divide up our year so that we don't burn out on, doing the Hall & Oates show, and we recharge our creative batteries with the downtime doing other things, and then we're very excited to come back and play it again.
That's
it's all about me.
I can't imagine how, I see two worlds here. As you know, I've worked with lots of people who are certainly in the music industry, but in different areas, who are very high up in their particular industries. And it's fascinating to me how often those people will get to the top. And you would know this way better than I would be. They get to the top of their industry and they sabotage the hell out of it. I mean, it's probably nowhere more than in the music industry. What do you think stopped you and Daryl going off the rails? I mean, you can't speak for Daryl, but you can certainly speak for you. When so many bands from around the time when you guys were huge have either faded into oblivion or have crashed into the side of the famed mountain,
Well, we didn't fall into a lot of the pitfalls of many musicians in terms of drugs and alcohol. we, of course, we've had our fun and ran around the world, crazy pop stars in the 70s and 80s. Don't get me wrong, it was a lot of fun. But
you're not professing that you were priest-like in your time.
Oh, no. Let's put it this way: there were no cell phones. Let's just leave it at that.
Thank God.
Thank God. But we both had our eyes. We had this vision that we were going to be musicians for the rest of our lives, and we saw so many people, so many of our contemporaries, people we worked with, bandmates, producers, all by the wayside through drugs, alcohol, and any number of things that may have happened to them. And we just never, even if you look back on in our pop heyday when we were at the top of the pop world, we weren't in the gossip columns. We didn't go to all the Hollywood parties. We didn't do any of that. We worked, basically. We worked like crazy. I mean, we made, to think about it this way, from 1972 until 1986, we made an album and toured and wrote new songs every year from 72 to 86 and never ever stopped. So there wasn't a lot of time for much else. It wasn't until the late 80s when I realized I had to get off that merry-go-round. It was too much. And I needed to create a personal life for myself. And I literally dropped out in the early 90s and moved to Colorado, lived in a log cabin, skied 100 days a year, rode a mountain bike, started over.
So tell us about that. Tell us about that moment of decision, because that's an important point, I think, for people at the top of their game. I think that often they get so embedded that they end up going from being deeply passionate and purposeful to being just completely burned out. And it can sour the very thing that is, the fruit of your soul.
Well, I guess I'll throw in a little advertisement for my book. It's detailed, in my book, all this stuff. But I'll just give you a quick, anecdotal situation. It was the late 80s. I was getting divorced. I was separating, about to get a divorce. Our manager, because Daryl and I weren't touring, had moved on to greener pastures. We were kind of rudderless when it came to the Hall & Oates thing. And for my personal, I had a financial upheaval. And I was basically financially, completely reckless. And but it wasn't even reckless. I just actually didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't have a real sense of what I owned. And, it was kind of I lived the life of, if I wanted something, I wrote a check and bought it. I didn't really think about where the money was coming from, or because the money was flowing at such a crazy rate in the 80s. The go-go 80s weren't the go-go 80s for nothing. And there was so much cash floating around. And if I wanted an airplane, I bought one. If I wanted a collection of antique, vintage cars, I bought them. House in Connecticut, two apartments in New York, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to, I'm not talking about that. But what happened was I got called down to Wall Street to our financial people at one point. And this was during the divorce and when the manager had left. And I was, politely informed that I was cash poor, as they like to say.
Yeah.
I had a lot of stuff, but I didn't have any real cash.
Wow.
After that meeting, that was a very sobering meeting, to say the least. And I jumped in a cab going back to my apartment in Greenwich Village. And in the back of the cab, I got a pain in my chest. And I thought, this is how it happens. I'm going to die in the back of this cab. And it was, luckily for me, obviously I'm still here, it was anxiety. But I didn't know what it was, and I thought I was really having a heart attack. I walked into my empty apartment because the furniture was all gone because I'd given most of it to my ex. The TV, the apartment was depressing. It was a bed, a TV, and a coffee pot in the kitchen, basically.
Right.
And I knew at that point I could fold, I could, give up, or I could fight. And I elected to fight. And my version of that was I began the very next morning to sell everything I owned. 2 apartments in New York, a house in Connecticut, an airplane, many cars. And I generated a bunch of cash, and I moved to Colorado. The only thing I kept was a little condo in Aspen, Colorado, and it was my salvation. I moved into it, and I basically started over again. And through that move, I met my future wife, had a kid, built a house, and basically rebuilt my life with a totally different perspective.
Fascinating. You know, one of the things I talk about on the show quite a bit is that leadership requires courage. And I'll often ask people, what was the most difficult decision you had to make? Was that it, or was it something else?
I would say, without a doubt, that was it. That changed the course of my life. Music no longer was the only thing in my life. It became part of my life, that I could, have a much, I had a much better balance and perspective. And plus, I was living in Colorado. I left the East Coast where I was brought up and lived my whole life. And my friends were skiers. They were mountain climbers. They were mountain bikers. They didn't care about my pop music career. All they cared about was, could I hang? Could I hang in the deep powder and jump off a cliff? And
sure.
Could I ride 100 miles on my bike? That kind of thing. That was really, and that just was a breath of fresh air for me, and literally and figuratively.
Well, I'm sure it was. One of the things that I see all the time, a lot of the clients that I work with privately will often complain, and we're seeing, I believe, an epidemic of this, in that people who are extremely successful are also extremely lonely, because they're seen in that element only. You're seen as John Oates of Daryl Hall and John Oates. You're seen as the movie star. You're seen as even the YouTube star now, whatever it might be, as opposed to as the human being. And I can imagine that it must have been very refreshing in many ways to suddenly discover, oh, I am more than that identity. Because like you said, you were in that from being a kid, and you guys were not famous. That would be a gross understatement. You were massive anywhere. And I imagine even walking down the street would have been difficult, because you were so, now we would say your brand was so strong. Mm-hmm. So to find yourself in this different world where people are not even asking about it, is going, dude, it's fresh powder. You coming?
That's right. Exactly.
It must have been very refreshing and very connecting. Did it bring you home to your soul?
Yes. It was the greatest thing I ever done for myself, the greatest gift I gave myself. And I didn't know how it was going to turn out. And honestly, I owe a lot to Colorado and my experience in the mountains, and I'll never forget it. And even though, we still have our house there, we don't live there full time, but there's a spiritual energy in the mountains that you can never find anywhere else. And even though we live in Nashville now, and I love Nashville for all the right reasons, there's still a certain part of my soul that will always be in Colorado because of what it gave to me.
Yeah, because it allowed you to return to center again. That's very cool. Now, you talked about growing up in small places, and growing up in the music, and then of course the fame. And the 70s and 80s were very different times than today. A lot of what our generation learned about what it meant to be a man, to say the least, was unhealthy and often very destructive. You talked about being divorced and getting married again and having a son. What is the most important lesson you were able to impart to your son Tanner as he was growing up?
Well, my wife is wise beyond her years. And I remember one day when we got our little ranch in Colorado, we were out there working in the field, fixing the fences, whatever it might be. And I was kind of gearing up in my mind to go back on the road with Daryl. And everything I had done on tour prior to that had been the boys club. And my wife said, if you're going to leave, this thing's not going to work. The same thing's going to happen to you that happened to you last time. She goes, I'm going with you, and we're taking our baby with us.
Wow. How old was your baby?
5 weeks.
Wow.
And we got on a plane.
She had some serious cojones.
She said, look, we're going to travel as a family, or we're not going to, or there won't be a family.
Fabulous.
And, it was hard for me to process that and come to grips with it, but I said, okay, you know what? I've done many, many things at this point now that are completely outside my, my old frame of reference, and I'm going to do it. So we took our son on the road, and I'm going to get to your question.
Sure.
We ended up homeschooling him from birth, basically,
Wow.
until he was 13. When he decided he wanted to go to a real school with real kids, and he had enough of the road life. But during that period of time, one of the proudest things I have as a parent is that I was with him every moment, pretty much from the time he was born until 13 years old. We experienced everything together. We traveled the world together, and we became very, very close. And even though now he's grown up and he's become a man and lives in a different part of the country, I think there's an unshakable connection now between us. And,
right.
One of the things I always said to him was I wanted him to become an independent thinker. That was my goal for him. If I could give him it, first of all, I realized he did not have any musical talent, which was fine by me. But I realized he had a very kind of inquisitive, analytical mind. And I thought to myself, this kid's going to be a scientist.
Really?
And that's what he ended up being. I never pushed him in any direction, gave him the opportunity to play every instrument in the world. They were sitting around the house. He never took to anything. But every time we'd go for a hike, we never got more than 20 feet before he started picking up rocks, looking underneath it, putting things in his pocket. And I immediately recognized that there was something else happening. And so, as we traveled the world together, I just made it a point to make sure he thought about things, and that he was very careful about what he said and how he said it. And one of the things I always told him was never use a word if you don't know what it means. And as time went on, he would hear people talk. We would discuss words that people used and how they used them. I was an English major. I was a journalism major. So I have an affinity for the American language.
Very astutely put.
Sorry. I couldn't help myself there. And so that was one of the things. Just being close with him and letting him be the man that he would eventually become.
That's very cool. It's interesting because when I speak to people who are from a particular industry, it's very often that they push their kids towards that, or they polarize it, which I will not. I'm an actor. My kid's going to be an actor, or I will never allow my child into show business. And none of that really says be you.
I really was, I didn't care what, I used to make a joke with him as he got a little bit older, when he started going off to a regular school. I said, don't worry about flunking out, son, because there's always a black t-shirt and a bunk on the bus for you. And I think that scared him so bad that he said,
I do not want to be my dad's roadie, forget it.
College.
I'm going to college, I'm going to study hard, because the only other option is I'm the roadie for my dad's band. Screw that.
It's college or the road crew. Take your pick.
Yeah. What is the dream that you hold as a father for Tanner?
Well, exactly. Nothing has changed. I want him to be. I want him to continue to think analytically and independently. I don't want him to be a follower. I want him to be a leader, and he is a leader. He's right. He's a born leader, and this was in him, and hopefully we allowed it to come out. It wasn't anything that I take credit for. He's very mature for his age because he spent his entire youth around adults. And I remember one funny little anecdote when he finally did go off to middle school in 9th grade. He went to a boarding school. And one of the most difficult things for him to do, having been homeschooled, and he came home one day and he said, Dad, when I ask the kids a question, they say, "'cause." He goes, "What does that mean?" Because he was used to asking questions and having an adult give him an answer.
Sure.
And the kids were just like, and he didn't understand that. He literally didn't understand how kids communicated at that age. because he had a large vocabulary. He had a very wide, he had a worldview.
Yeah.
He'd been to all around the world, and he, as I said, he was with adults. So that was one of the hurdles that he had to get over when he finally did go to a conventional school.
What do you think has shaped your philosophy as a human being? Because I know you're a well-read man. Our friend in common has shared that with me. That you're well-read. You are a philosophical thinker. I mean, you talk about your son being a scientist. Well, really, isn't that what a journalist is? It's the nature of inquiry. Science and journalism share that. Good journalism and good science share that. They share what I refer to as healthy skepticism. Our common friend is one of my favorite healthy skeptics. People said, he worked with you, really? I was like, oh yeah. And wasn't he skeptical? Absolutely. My favorite kind of people, because it means you don't just accept or absolutely reject. It's like, well, I think this is bullshit, but let me find out. So what shaped that philosophy for you, John?
Well, I think I was brought up my parents were good people. They were salt of the earth type people. We weren't wealthy by any means, lower middle class, but they provided me with everything I needed to become a musician because they recognized I had musical talent. And I think that, I was very grounded. My parents stayed together their whole lives. Unfortunately, my mother passed away a few years ago. My father's 95, and still kicking and doing well.
Wow.
Hard to believe. He's incredible. And I just, I'm very grounded. As I said, I didn't have a lot when I was growing up, but I learned how to work for it. I believe in hard work. I believe in people. I believe in, on the spiritual side, I believe in the eternal validity of the soul. I believe that the energy that makes us who we are goes on. It never ever ends. It's something that may be transferred and be transformed, but that means to me that there's a when they say there's a light at the end of the tunnel when you're in your final moments, in a way I kind of look forward to that, because I believe that there is an eternity that goes on, whether we're in our physical form is our physical form. We're just kind of sharing this and kind of inhabiting it for a while. So I like to look at it that way, and so I'm just I want to experience life. I want to enjoy good people. I want to be kind as best I can, and I want to be creative. That's a pretty darn good life.
It is. What's I believe that the best people in the world, it's what I believe. It's not the truth. It's just what I believe. I believe the best people in the world are the people, they're kind and they're generous and they're loving and all those kinds of things. But one of the things I know about them for sure is the best people I've met are all committed to growth. They have a growth mindset. They understand that they're not there. There is no there. And I think it's really important. And particularly, it's very likely my own grandson will listen to it. He's a musician, right? That he'll watch this show. He's a musician in a band and is, done pretty good and etc. And I think it's easy for someone like that. And, and I'm using him as an example because you're in the music industry, to look at somebody like John Oates and go, yeah, but you're that. And I think it's very easy for us to look at leaders. I know I face it. People say to me, yeah, but Dov, you got out and you've spoken all over the world. You've written all these books. You know what? There is no there. There's a commitment to growth. So if I may, let me ask you, as a successful person, as someone who's at the level you're at, what are you still working on within yourself? What is it that you're evolving or focused on as the next level of your evolution, what you're trying to grow into?
I think trying to be more tolerant in general when I come upon situations and or people that might not always agree or be in line with the way I think. and trying to see it from their point of view. I think it's important to try your best to step out of your shoes and into their shoes if you can, and try to be as objective about why they may be acting or saying or doing what they're doing, because it's there's something behind it that we can't understand because we're not them. And if we can just try to be a little bit more sensitive to that, I think that will help us all. And Lord knows in this world that we're living in today, we all need to be able to try to be a little bit more understanding. It's very difficult, but you got to keep trying. You can never stop.
Yeah, one of the things that I like to remind myself and others of is anyone doing anything is doing it for a good reason, according to them.
According to them.
Right. And that's an important thing to remember, because if you remember that, you can have compassion. Because, and the example I like to give, because I'm married to a brown girl, I'm in that world like you. I've traveled and lived in a lot of different countries. I've been around a lot of other cultures. And one of the things I like to give as an example is that if you grew up in the United States in, right where you are, right, in the south of the southeast, and you grew up there in the 1950s, it would not be unusual for you to be a child in the 1940s and 50s to think that black people are less than white people, because that's the milieu, that's the environment you live in. And until you get out of it, until you get exposed to something else, it's not racism, it's indoctrination. There's a vast difference. There's the conscious choice of that, and the willingness to say this person's being a dick, not because they are a dick, but because for whatever the circumstances that I'm completely unaware of that are making them a dick. And maybe it's momentary. Maybe it's that person just cut them off. Maybe their wife, husband just left them. Maybe their kid just died. Who knows what it is? And that moment of compassion allows us to go, okay, my question to myself is, what if this is not that person? What if this is simply my experience of them in this moment? Because I know I've had people meet me when I was feeling shit, and if they judged me on that, that would be horrible. Or they met me at a certain period of my life where I was less than exemplary. I'm like, I'm not sure. Like you said, there was times when we were glad there was no cell phones. So, that's a really great lesson for all of us. Thank you for that, John. I appreciate it. And it kind of brings me into this next question, which is, in a world where today people are very often terrified to offend, what is your bravest opinion?
Wow.
I know it's a question you probably not got asked.
I've never been asked that question.
Yeah.
My bravest opinion is that, here's my bravest opinion. In fact, I was talking about it today. There was a shooting in New Zealand today.
Yep.
Shooting at
40
a mosque.
people dead.
At a mosque.
It's terrible. Yeah.
I was discussing it with my wife this morning over breakfast, and I said, there's been more injustice, harm, and violence done in the name of religion in the history of the world, in the history of Western civilization, and probably Eastern civilization as well, than almost anything else. And to pervert the purity of what religion is supposed to be or should be for one's own agenda is a crime. And I look at that as and I'm not I'm not an atheist or an agnostic. I do believe in a higher power, but
sure,
I have a real problem with the perversion of established religions. I think it's a real that's a true crime.
That's very interesting. You probably don't know about this about me, but I traveled the world to study with different spiritual masters. That was my original journey. I studied Vedanta, which is Hindu philosophy, Buddhism, the Tao, Gnostic Christianity, and Kabbalah, Jewish philosophy. And I've been asked on interviews where I've been, because I get interviewed a lot too, and I've been asked, well, of all those, which is the greatest religion? And I say, you really want my truth? And they say, yeah. I said, they're all terrible. And they go, what do you mean? And I go, the religions themselves are not. but as men who take it out into the world, it's horrible. And and they said, well, which one is the best of, which one would you say is the purest? And I said, listen, they're all exactly the same message. Be a decent human being and treat other people in a decent way. And here's some guidelines for how to do that. Maybe you wear some payas because you're Jewish, maybe, and some tzitzis, or maybe you wear your magic underpants because you're a Mormon, or whatever it is. But all those is ways to remind you, because the tzitzis that the Jews wear are to remind you of the 365 commandments, not 10, but 365. The reason the reason that Muslim men are supposed to wear underwear is to remind them of fidelity. People don't know these things. These rules are actually about teaching us to be more respectful. But we take it into you're right, I'm wrong, which is ego. It's got nothing to do with spirituality. Ego is I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong. Okay, therefore I'm good, you're bad, vice versa. Terrible. And so thank you for that. I appreciate your courage in that. So I'll bring it to an easier one. What is your guilty pleasure?
My guilty pleasure. Well, I hate to say it. My guilty pleasure is I'm addicted to cars.
Yeah.
And I have a terrible sweet tooth. And my wife and I are on a sugar-free, low-carb keto.
Oh, you're going keto?
We're doing it as we speak. And the first week was really rough, I have to say, because it was tough. But we're about 4 weeks in now, and I feel great. I have to say, it's really changed. And I thought maybe it wouldn't be so dramatic, but physically I feel good. And I'm not, my mind isn't clicking after dinner. Do I need that piece of dark chocolate? Do I need that piece of pie? I've kind of broken I've broken the evil hold of sugar for a while.
Yeah.
I hope I can stick with it.
Oh, I'm sure you can. I've been keto for about 2.5 years, and it's changed my sleep patterns. It's changed my focus level. It's gotten rid of a lot of things that I had problems with. Just gone. It's wonderful.
But I'm still addicted to cars.
But I was going to say, there's no restriction on cars on the keto program.
Well,
so what's the car, John?
Well, I just had an amazing experience of collaborating on a build of a 1960 Porsche Cabriolet that I had built by a guy named Rod Emery of North Hollywood. He's an amazing guy, and through the process of collaborating on this build, we became friends. Amazing family man, an artist, a really interesting person, and. To be honest with you, when the car was finally finished, which was just recently, I had a terrible bout of depression because I thought, I can't call him every day and discuss what the carpets and where are we going to put the mirror and where are we going to. I mean, it's been a real joy to have this incredible experience with him. And he made a joke. He said we can always build another one.
But it's interesting as we're finishing up here. You just said something. What you're doing is showing that part of you that is a collaborative person. Just like with Daryl Hall, John Oates, it's the same with this guy with building the car, that actually you are a partner guy, that's part of your collaborative nature. And that is probably something that really feeds your soul, is to have that.
Yeah, I love the art of collaboration. I do a lot of songwriting here in Nashville, and I love, it's a fascinating thing to make something from nothing. And
absolutely.
Pick the brain of a creative individual and see what motivates them and what moves them emotionally to be able to try to express what it is they want to express. It's fascinating.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah.
So as we wind up here, please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you and all your resources and the tour and maybe your book or whatever it is you want to share with us. The floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Now here comes the pitch. My book is available on Amazon and in certain bookstores. It's called Change of Seasons. And if you want to know a little bit more about the early days of the Hall & Oates experience, that's what that book is really. I detail that in great. I really get into that. I have many records out. I like to jokingly say you can buy them wherever records are not sold.
That's true. Yeah.
But my latest one's called Arkansas, and it celebrates music from the 1920s and 30s. And I'm on tour, hallandoates.com. You can find out about that. You can go to johnoates.com. I have a very active Facebook and Instagram page. John Oates Official is my Instagram page. Got lots of pictures of cars and things like that. So it's easy to find me if you want to find me. And this year is all about spreading the Hall & Oates vibe around the world.
That's fabulous. Well, we will definitely post all that information onto the show notes and make sure that everybody has access to that. I really want to thank you for being here. This was great fun and a great pleasure.
It was a great conversation, Dov. I really appreciate you having me on. And if I could just make one more comment before
absolutely
we leave. One of the things that guides me is a very silly little phrase. I like to say, when you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're still in the frickin' tunnel.
That is true. That is true.
That's my mantra.
Okay. Well, what's that one from the Marigold Hotel? Something about it's not over till something about it not being done till it's done or something. But it's the same thing, right? I love that. Yeah, that's a very good point. If you gotta look for the light in the tunnel, you're in the tunnel. It's okay. Good.
Still working. Still moving forward.
Still in process. Fantastic. Thank you, John. Thank you for being with us. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And I just want to ask you to do one thing, and that is this. I want you to tell our audience one piece of practical advice, some practical guidance that you would give them in the context of what it is we've been talking about.
Think before you talk.
Same as you taught your son, Tanner, right? Think before you talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really enjoyed having you here. It's been an absolute pleasure and truly an honor. Thank you so very much for being part of the show and for everything that you shared. And as I said, we will share in the show notes. And I want to say to you, dear listeners, that as always, information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from the application of what it is you've learned. So don't just listen back, take some notes and see what you can apply into your life, into your business, into your leadership from today's show. You can find out more about hiring me, Dov Baron, as your speaker or strategist by going to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or speaking, fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or speaking. Be aware that the research consistently shows that even the fastest growing companies face the challenge of spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing top talent, and only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of training and developing your talent only to have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. And also you can remember to go to the matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need www, just matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com. Get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's absolutely free to you. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about what you need to keep, cherish, and respect, and what you need to let go of in order to evolve into the kind of leader that you can be. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.